Welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. I am with Jill Thompson. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. How are you doing tonight?
Well, it's early morning for me,
Oh,
so
that's sorry. Yeah,
yeah, it's
it's nighttime for me.
it's perfect. I would like to speak to the Scary Godmother at nighttime, I think.
Yes. I should drag some of the other skeletons in. They're sitting over there, actually.
My first question that I ask everyone is, why do you love comic books?
Wow. Why do I love comic books? I love comic books because it's a form of storytelling that I'm actively taking a part in. When I've always loved them, so I really can't tell you why, except that when I was a little girl, it hit me in a certain way. Like I started liking comic strips in the newspaper, and then I moved on to reading comic books, reading Archie Comics, and kept going to different genres from there. But it was a form of escapism, but a storytelling that not only I enjoyed reading the stories, and maybe it was lucky that I started out with Archie because I felt like it was a group of friends.
Yeah.
And I wasn't a teenager when I started reading them. I was little, but they were like role models to me. And I figured this is the type of friends that you should have. And it was funny and it was fashionable and it was goofy. And I felt like I was also learning history because I was reading old ones at the time. I was reading my first Archie comics that I got were from a moving sale that was down the street. And they were picking up a house, putting it on a truck and moving it across town to put in a municipal parking lot. And the people that lived in this house were having a house sale. They were selling everything inside their house, including some fixtures and things. And I'm assuming that was just so it would be easier to move the structure to a different place. But one of the things they were selling was a crate full of old comic books. And the person there sold it to me for like $1 or a couple of dollars, maybe $5. I can't even remember at this point. And it was a big crate, this many. And they were all from the 40s and 50s. And then that just got me hooked. And they, it would make references, because you could tell in the indicia what year it was. And I knew from living with my grandmother that was a long time ago. And that was, when movies are black and white, and they would reference actors and slang and other weird things that happened at that point in history. Yeah. So it just kind of hit me in a certain way. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell a story in that way. Different than all the books I read. I like reading books, but and I still love reading books. It was just from that point on, whenever I would read a book, and including It Still Happens Now, I start breaking it down into comic pages and panels. So I start adapting everything I read, even if it's newspaper or like an online article about something. I just start breaking it down as to how I would show that.
It's just a natural instinct.
Yeah.
Very cool. Do you have a favorite Archie artist?
Yes, I do. Why can't I remember his name? Harry Luce, is that
Harry
it?
Lucey?
Yeah, Harry Lucey is my favorite. Then Dan DeCarlo Jr. I learned about people ask me where I get my sense of style, and it's from Dan DeCarlo Jr. from Betty and Veronica comics. I feel like that taught me how to dress. Like you should dress well. No matter what you do.
And did they influence your art style? Because I can maybe kind of see the Harry Lucey gestures.
Well, I mean, he was I like Samm Schwartz as well, for different reasons. And I really like Bob Bulling for little Archies. Like there are certain little Archies I really, really, really love. I think it helped me understand that the acting that you can do in this most simple amount of rendering, right? Because Archie are broken down into like very, very few lines, and not overly rendered with cross-hatching or a lot of shading or anything like that. But Harry Lucy was able to show me that a full range of emotions was possible. And I was actually really pleased to find out that Jaime Hernandez also was influenced by him, because he's one of my biggest influences. In fact, behind me, there's a big Jaime Hernandez book. But those are my two favorite Archie artists.
Are there what other comics artists influence your art style, both in terms of illustration and watercolor?
Well, it's funny. I mean, there are a lot of people who I really loved and I would say were influences on me, but you probably don't see it in my art. It was like I learned things from reading them. My first favorite comic book artist is John Romita Jr.
Oh,
Then John Buscema. And this is only from just like picking up old comics, because once I made the shift over from Archie Comics to superhero comics, I would go and just pick up comics wherever I found them, whether or not it was at the time in a magazine rack in the drugstore, or at a flea market or an antique store or anything, any place there was a comic, I just was drawn to it no matter what it was. So I wasn't reading anything that was technically current all the time. But those were my first two favorites. And then I happened to cross the John Byrne X-Men comic, and then boom, that changed my world. He was my Jack Kirby, I suppose, in so much as hitting me with such force. And that's when I just became crazy about superheroes and X-Men and stuff like that. And that's when I was like, I'm gonna do that for a living.
Yeah,
guys.
Sorry. Yeah, I've read that Kitty Pryde was hit you pretty hard when she.
Yes, yes, definitely. I was about the time I was 12, 13 years old, I had found this old issue, the X-Men 129, Run for Your Life, Kitty Pryde. And I lived right outside Chicago at the time. I live in Chicago now, but it was a young curly-haired teenage girl, didn't fit in anywhere, running down an alley from some bad guys who were going to run her down with what looked like my dad's Cadillac. And then she was saved by Phoenix. And then that whole issue went on to having Kitty Pryde, like free Wolverine and Colossus from cages. And then Kitty Pryde and the White Queen had, a giant telekinesis fight. So it was a very important issue.
Yeah. That was also my first X-Men comic, weirdly enough.
It's a good one.
Yeah. The whole Dark Phoenix, it's one of those very few things that got collected in a trade back then. I had the Bill Sienkiewicz cover.
Can you imagine just like that's everyone else got to build up to that point, and it dove right in the middle of it. And that's when I started spending all my money on back issues so I could figure out what happened before that. And then, because, you come in the middle, she's starting to be corrupted by power, and then she becomes Dark Phoenix. And that's some intense stuff to jump in at like 13 years old.
Yeah, we'll talk about
George. It was, probably isn't now.
We'll talk about George later, but I think the Judas contract is even worse because a trade came out of that, and like no context, all of a sudden this little girl is a traitor.
Yeah, that was happening currently. Like, I think I was older when that thing started to happen, but that was pretty much the time, like the guy that was running the comic book store, his name is Rick, and I think he still has a comic book shop called One Stop Comics in Oak Park, Illinois. But that was my first comic book shop that I ever went to. I was the only girl that went there. And he was really good with, he was like, Jill, if you like this John Byrne guy, you're probably gonna love this Teen Titans, you should pick this up. And again, it was like, oh, what is this? Oh my God. You know, so it was like up another level. And it was always a John Byrne, George Perez, like who's better? And
Yeah. Actually,
mostly,
yeah. Can I pick your brain about that? Can I pick your artist brain about that? Because I noticed that a lot of comics fans, myself included, will always compare John and George. But I noticed that a lot of the creators I speak to see them as completely different. Where do you stand on this, having been both?
I mean, completely different. Of course, their art styles are completely different, but they hit you on the same level. They're so powerful. It's full of action. There's so much emotion in it. John Byrne, less panels per page. George Perez, as many panels as you can possibly fit on a page. That was always some of the amazing things. So, but I think from the time period and the type of characters, you know, so it was here are the X-Men, here are the Teen Titans. Oh my God, I can't tell you how much I totally marked out when it was the Teen Titans versus the X-Men, or like crossover issues and the Avengers and this and the JLA and all this kind of stuff happened. And it was always, you know, they're always across from each other on the cover, you know, they're gonna fight. So having that kind of stuff, it was hard. I'm trying to think. I would always defend John Byrne, but as an artist, because he was my first, you know, comic book, you know, superstar that I liked. But soon I understood that they were of equal stature as far as something that I liked. And that's when I started to discern all sorts of different styles. And I went back to buy older comics and just any comics at all. So I became well versed in, you know, like Gil Kane and Alex Toth and other stuff that had impact for different reasons and different storytelling reasons. It was just super. It's like asking you which is your favorite show on a streaming service. It's like, I love them for different reasons. Yeah. They might be similar in subject matter, but they're all super intense and or super enjoyable. There's
really
no
need to rank them.
Yeah, I could never, I can't rank them. I mean, I can only rank them in the fact that I saw John Byrne first, so John Byrne's art first, so it hit me in a way that only that type of thing can. And you're reading, you know, it's a collaboration too. So it's the way the story is set up with the collaborators. So it has John Byrne adapting Chris Claremont. And I know that John did a lot of
changes.
Addition. Well, I don't know if it's changes. Maybe, I mean, I've read that it was, but also, you know, I think that they talked about things, or maybe eventually they didn't, and John just changed things. I don't know, but I don't know if that happened with Marv Wolfman and George Perez.
I believe they continued and remained to be best friends. So
yeah, I believe they plotted, if they did any plotting, or they were talking about what was going to happen, and there was input from George, and you know, like that it was done beforehand, or it was done during, you know, I don't know the history or the gossip about that kind of a thing, because all, like, obviously George Perez is a great writer, or a creator, you know, a comic book creator, the same way John Byrne writes and illustrates his own thing. He's a comic book creator. He's not just a penciler or you know, just doing one part of it. So whatever they contributed is because of their gifts as storytellers. How
much did fangirl Jill Thompson mark out when the Uncanny X-Men New Teen Titans crossover came out?
Very much, completely, very much. Yeah, I mean, and at the time, the world wasn't like it is now. There was nobody I could talk to about it except myself, you know, and the guy I worked at the comic book store. because I didn't know anybody else that liked comic books the way that I did at all. Anybody I went to school with, it wasn't until I got to high school that I met a couple of guys that liked comics in the way that I did. But by then I already wanted to draw them, and I was already going to conventions, meeting artists, and taking their advice on my crappy drawings so I could get better. And it was already my career path at that point.
Very, very determined from an early age. I read that you were sending samples in at 11 years old.
I was sending samples in on loose leaf notebook paper, drawn in ballpoint pen or marker or whatever I had around. And I got some very nice rejection letters back on cool stationery from the Marvel bullpen. And that was kind of almost part of the thrill of getting. I have no idea who the poor person was that would go through kids' drawings and find the form letter and then just check off the boxes of because the whole letter, I don't know if they still make them like this, but the rejection letter, the encouraging rejection letter, was written in the Stan Lee patois.
Yeah.
So it was like, hey there, true believer, thanks for sending your super samples to the mighty Marvel bullpen. Before you can work here at the hallowed halls of, and they give the address, and we're drawing Spidey and the FF and the gang, it's like, you need to learn how to draw. And then they just had a list of things you needed to learn to draw. And someone was like, went through and marked them all off. And I just figured, I was never upset when I got that, because I felt it was feedback. And I just was like, oh, okay, I'm not ready yet. But as soon as I learn how to draw all of these 25 things, I'll be able to work there. And I kept sending things in the hope that the check marks would become less and less. So I never saw it as bad. I just saw it as it was a way that made me more determined, and it gave me more of a focus. It was like, okay, well, I have to learn this stuff. And then when I ended up showing my crappy superhero drawings and comics to artists at conventions, there's an artist named Bill Reinhold who lives here in Illinois, and he told me all of the things that were wrong with what I drew, but not in a way that made me feel bad, in a way that encouraged me to go to art school. And he told me why I was doing them wrong. So, which is, anything he has ever pointed out to me is always the first thing that I will see when someone shows me their art. And it's because once he pointed out the mistakes I was making and why I was making them, they were so glaring. And being a good student, I went home and I fixed everything. So the next time I had new pages that were different, I didn't make those mistakes, but I was very eager to show him. So I would go back to the convention and go right back to him to show him my new pages. And, so it was almost like having a teacher that you saw every, 8 weeks. And he was nice enough to talk to me about it and encourage me to go to the art school that he had gone to, which I did.
That's great. I think there's a sociological term for that. It's called deliberate practice, because it's different from practice in that you're practicing, but you continually get feedback and you know exactly what you're working on. Because a lot of people just practice and then they don't know what they need to be fixing. So I think that worked out great.
Boy, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Because I do see there are people who have shown me stuff at conventions, and I usually have to ask now, because I'm like, are you coming here because do you want some feedback, like constructive criticism, or do you just want to show me what you did? And a lot of people just want to show you what they did, and they'll keep drawing this, and they'll come to the next time and they'll show me technically the same thing, just drawn a different way. Like some people they like to draw, head drawings or just figures. So they don't want to know that they should draw backgrounds. They don't want to know if their proportions are off. They just want to show it to you. So I look at it.
I understand you have a background in improv theater.
I do.
Th- How does that contribute to doing a story?
Um, my background in improv theater has helped me as a storyteller because it allowed me to learn how to think on my feet with nothing but a suggestion that was completely from out of left field. And when I first started writing my own stories, I had been so used to working and collaborating with other people, it was hard to try and switch gears and figure out how to write. It's like I knew I had a story in my head, but what I would have to do is I would have to sketch out thumbnails of it first before I could then go through and write what it's about. And then once, and there's nothing more intimidating than a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen staring, blinking white. And then you have this, I don't know, it's not a block, but a very intimidating task before you. Is like, okay, make up the coolest or funnest or best thing or funniest thing ever now. And that's not always easy to do. But if you have a character, even if it's a character that you've made up and you know something about, which is once I created Scary Godmother, I knew the personalities of my characters. And I would often put a bunch of nouns, put a bunch of verbs, put a bunch of situations or activities, like in different bowls. Pick one out. Like, so it's like in improv, when you get up to perform in front of someone or you play improv games, it's like, give me a who, what, and a where.
Yeah.
And that takes the complete pressure off of it. You could do a Spider-Man. It's like, okay, so Spider-Man, so that's your who. Then your what is,
taking pictures,
eating a hot dog at a New York hot dog cart. And then where, it's in front of the Baxter building. So that sets your situation. It's like, and then you think, well, and then what happens? It's like, so you set your scene. You don't have to worry about how something happens, but that's what happens usually. If you're performing improv, if you're doing true improv and you're only trying to make something up with suggestion of the audience, it could be people are trying to mess with you. It's like, let's give them like a lot of really weird things and see what they can do with it. And a true improv artist will be able to figure out how to either take that and mutate it into something else, or it'll just stay in that situation. And you always say yes, right? If your partner throws something in front of you, you don't. If they're making something or they're doing a bits of business where, they might be chopping or, playing the piano, it's like, well, you go along with that. And your world becomes yes and. So it's my characters are doing this, and then what happens? And you just build upon it. And I found it to be very helpful. And when I was in improv classes, there were a lot of people who worked in advertising who were taking the courses so they could come up with, ad campaigns or think on their feet, or when a client would come up to them and give them a crappy idea, or it's like, we need our campaign to have these things in it. How do you switch that around to then make it into something that's engaging?
We'll
and
work with it.
Yeah. I think it's also why I am not afraid to be on a stage anywhere. Like at a convention, I'm more intimidated if they're like, please come up with a slideshow or a set plan of something. I'm happier if it's a Q&A. And it's like, give me a microphone and a full room, and I will start talking to the audience and pull questions out and do that, versus now come up with something, give us your lesson plan or what you're going to talk about for 60 minutes. And oh my God, I'll start to sweat and freak out because I'm like, I don't know. It's like, I'm not good at planning. I'm good at winging it.
Yeah. The first ever comic I saw of yours, because I started reading comics in like 1986, but I started buying comics in 1991. So the first ever comic I saw of yours, I was diving through the back issue bins. There is this George Perez cover of Wonder Woman number 46, and it's entitled Chalk Drawings.
Oh,
I believe it was your second issue.
It it was my first full issue.
Yeah.
I believe. And because I had one that was before that, but I think there were other people in there. I'm not good with the numbers anymore. Oh yeah, that was crazy intense to do as one of your first things with one of your artistic idols.
How did that feel?
Oh my, talk about sweating. Like to know that I was going to work with George Perez. I mean, I never talked to him while I worked on there because he was busy doing War of the Gods and then also working on a thing for Marvel, which
Infinity
only
Gauntlet.
he could. Yeah. Thank you for being much more of a nerd than me. So he, only he could write and illustrate 2 full books at the same time with the amount of panels and characters, because if you think about it, there are probably, at the very least 6 to 8 characters in every panel, always, all the time, doing something earth-shatteringly big. They're either fighting each other or all their costumes have a million details on them. And there's probably a ton of rocks around because when I was on a volcano at the top of Mount Etna in Sicily, all I could think of when I was walking around on the lava rocks is this would be like if George Perez drew the whole world, because there was nothing but rocks around me and they had all this detail in them. So that to be able to work on such an important character with an incredible maestro and like George Perez and do an incredibly emotional subject matter was really intimidating. But thankfully, your improv background just says, and yes, you can. So you will do this now. But it was, I look back at it and I was like, oh my God, I was not good at all back then. I would do everything over if I could.
Really?
But yeah, it's weird. Like when you're starting out and you're a penciler, Romeo Tangal was perfect for George Perez, but I didn't think he was a match for me as an inker. That's the weird thing. I think one of the arts of comic book editorial and art direction is to be able to find people's artistic styles that blend well together. And you can be a competent inker and really good at what you do, but it's not always the best style to go over someone else. Sometimes it's interesting to take 2 people who are like so completely different and put them together just to see what happens. But when you can put down, I feel like a lot of the stuff that I penciled in my very first jobs at DC was lost because a lot of my stuff was really subtle. Mm-hmm. And it got, it became more the work of someone else than it was what I was intending, which is why eventually I started inking myself, because I felt like certain really important, subtle and or emotional things that I was drawing were just kind of, the nuances were gone. And which is good in the long run, because it made me a better artist and it made me do something I had always been afraid to do because I hadn't practiced enough. But then, you just do it. And, my work evolved because I was able to do that. And then I got to do jobs where I got to do both parts. And then I moved my way up until I did everything. And then that was my ultimate goal, was to be a comic book creator. Like I wanted to be a person that did all of the parts. Yeah. I still like to collaborate, but I didn't want to just be a person that always had to have someone else to hang their skills upon. Yeah. I like collaborating. I like collaborating very much, but I like creating my own worlds, or adapting something all by myself.
I was gonna say you're your own best inker and your own best colorist.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do you think that particular issue, I don't know, maybe set the stage for a lot of your work? Because that's an issue with not a lot of action, or no action, and yeah.
Well, I like superhero comics. I do not like drawing the underside of cars, which people frequently throw at another person or hit someone in the face with. So I like showing the subtle moments in things. I do like action, but I would say like my strength definitely lies in the acting and the quiet moments, facial expressions. I like to set it. I like to set a stage. I like to dress the set. Some of my favorite. I realize as the years have gone by, instead of making things easier for myself, when I create, even now when I'm thinking about how ideally I would like to move along, I would love to be able to, it's almost like I want to animate, but panel by panel, because I want to just paint the background and then put the person in them instead of having to paint around everything. But that's making more work for yourself. But I love, the place where everything's happening is as much a character as the people who populate it.
Yeah.
And when I was teaching, that's the one thing I would really have to force my students to do, because it's not necessarily the most fun part, but it can be if you allow it to be, because there's nothing more boring, in my estimation, is looking at a comic where you are forced to read the word balloons, because there's nothing else to tell you what's happening except the dialogue. And I feel like in our medium, we have the luxury of not having, it's like every time there's a word balloon, it takes up valuable real estate to show what the characters are doing or where they are or how they interact with each other. So the word balloons shouldn't be reiterating what the art direction is saying, right? Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it works. So there are always exceptions to that rule. But I find, and I use this analogy a lot, that comic books are like the best cake you've ever had. If you like cake, it only works with cake in this. So it's like, imagine your favorite cake. It's chocolate cake, fresh out of the oven. It's had a chance to cool off a little. It's, great crumb, super tasty, not dry at all. I don't want to use the word moist because some people are grossed out by the word moist, but for cake, it works. And so you go to take a bite of it and someone says, hey, don't eat that yet. You're like, why? This is the best thing ever. It's like, I just had a bite and it's the best thing you could ever imagine. You're like, no, there's more. And they take just the perfect amount of icing and they spread it across the top, and it complements that cake so well. But you think when you're a little kid, it's that end piece of cake, the birthday cake that you might get at the grocery store or something. It's got all those really sweet flowers on the end of it, and there's really not much cake in it. That's too much dialogue. And then there's the one that has just like so little on it that you're like, oh, it's good, but it's not so good. So like comics are the perfect blend of dialogue and the art. And the dialogue you don't have to have dialogue in every panel. You can, the writer or yourself as the writer, obviously can show you what happens, can create emotion, can create a passage of time, can create menace, can do all sorts of things without any words. And then when the dialogue is spoken, it has so much more meaning. It's got a lot of weight. It's got gravity, whether it's a whisper or a funny quip or a big reveal or some kind of thing, or if it's a caption, and that the same holds with the turn of a page. It's a micro amount of time. But from panel to panel, you are also changing the amount of time that happens. It can go from seconds to years. from one panel to the next. But there's something about turning the page that works so much differently than scrolling up on something.
Surprise.
It's like you can turn that page and then there's almost like a Jack Kirby reveal, and it's, another world that's so intense and crazy. So, and it may or may not need dialogue, because it drives me crazy when I see comics that have all these word balloons all over the place, boom, 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 on top. And it's almost like, oh, the characters should duck because there's all this crap flying overhead. And you read through and some of it's necessary and some of it's not. And I look at those comics and I think these people really need to be writing TV or film, or they come from television or film, or books or something like that. And they forget that the pictures are telling the story. And they feel like, because they're used to characters being able to talk without the words getting in the way. If it's a book, I'm reading the monologue. I'm also picturing what's happening. I don't have to worry about the pictures being taken up by the prose there. And in TV, you can have a silent voiceover, or not a silent voiceover, but a voiceover where a character is doing something completely different. The same way you can in comics, except you don't have to worry about all of that taking up what you're seeing. Like you see the closed captions on the bottom sometimes and they go through really quickly, but oftentimes they're not even the thing that the people are saying because it's too much.
Yeah.
And you'd be able to read it in time. So in comics, you've got, in the best case scenario, you have this perfect blend of word balloons and art.
I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted by your cat.
Oh, that's Maximo.
Very cute.
And then there's another one, Oberon. He's usually up in things, but I don't know.
And working with Grant Morrison.
So I was expecting that now that I had this like great rapport with the people that I wrote, or that wrote the comics I was working on, that's how it's going to be all the time. And Grant would send something in, but he was like traveling all around all the time. I think one time I was working on the Invisibles and there was some reference that I was supposed to get, and I didn't know how to find this thing he was talking about. And he was like, oh no, I've been up to Nepal, I'll send you some pictures. And then no, you couldn't, because he was on a mountain somewhere doing some kind of invisible style stuff. And so I realized quickly that I wasn't gonna be having that type of hands-on collaboration experience. But when I did finally meet him, and we or not when I finally met him, but like once we met and we were talking, we get along. He has a great sense of humor. We made each other laugh. It's just that he's not going to be that type of talk to you on the phone guy.
Okay. Did you in fact base Ragged Robin off yourself?
No, I did not. I based Ragged Robin off the sketches Grant sent me, because he faxed me sketches of how everyone was supposed to look. And I drew my interpretation of what he had drawn.
Okay.
But if people want to say it looks like me, I'm more than happy to say it looks like me.
I know Duella Dent was based on you, on
Yes.
Kingdom Come.
Yes.
Yeah.
I took photos for that. So.
And of course, the one that is based on you is Scary Godmother, right?
Yes, very much.
How did you come up with Scary Godmother?
It was one of those right place at the right time things. Actually, Todd Johnson, the writer of Tribe, always was telling me, he's like, you're really interesting. You should write a comic about yourself. I go, there's like, I got nothing to say, and I would always have like a sketchbook filled with interesting characters, but there was no story to go behind it. So when my first niece was born, I wanted to be her godmother, right? I always thought like the godmother was just a position someone said, you get to, if we die in a plane crash, you get the baby. I didn't know that it was a godmother in the Catholic Church is someone who's responsible for the spiritual upbringing of that, or the religious upbringing of that child. but still, I technically wanted to do that. But then I thought about the way I was dressing at the time, which was a lot more goth than I am now, even though, no, I still wear my motorcycle jacket all the time. But I had like, my hair was much bigger. And I was like, black motorcycle jacket. I dressed pretty much all in black all the time. And I said this out loud. I was like, I could see myself standing in the back of the Catholic church and everyone be like, waiting for me to do whatever you did with the baby. And I said, I'd be a pretty scary godmother. And when I said that, it's literally light bulb over your head kind of thing. I saw a tiny kind of witch Tinkerbelly type of a fairy, and I quickly sketched her out on just a small scrap of paper. She had black eyes like a Brian Froud fairy at the time. She still had the same type of hat. There were more spiders on it, I think. And then the second thing I drew of her, she pretty much looked like she does now. Where it was all in color. The first one was just black and white. And that's how my idea for the Scary Godmother came about. And when I wrote that down, then I started thinking, when I saw her in my head, I started thinking, well, where does she live? She lives in a haunted house, of course. Who does she live with? And then, and then I thought about my mother whenever I would go to bed at night, she'd kiss me, tuck me in and say, don't let the bugaboos get you. Right. And I was like, and then it'd be the monster under the bed named Bugaboo, like Mom said. And then she was like, well, there'll be a skeleton in the closet, of course. And then I started thinking about like all this other stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I've got a real idea. I've got a character that has ideas coming with it. And then then I wanted to tell a story for the baby when she was born. So this is my niece Hannah. And so it just it was such an improv lesson, because it was one of those things that was, once I knew who it was, then I knew where it was going to happen and what was happening. Oh, well, it would be for the baby, and it would be Hannah, and she learned how not to be scared. And it was like, I don't know if she was ever going to be scared. At the time I made this for her, she was like just born. So I didn't know what she was going to grow up and look like. So I just based, her hair color on the color of her parents' hair, and made her, like a child of a certain age that was small enough to do things by herself, if you were a free range child. And then I had a cousin, Jimmy, that used to scare me and my cousins when we were little, because he was a lot older than us. And Hannah also has an uncle named Jim. So I just made a cousin Jimmy. And it's just like, it was one of those, and then, and it almost wrote itself. So I started writing it out, and I realized, oh, I actually have my own thing. I should try and I was gonna make it a book for the baby that was just me illustrating something and then sewing it together, like making a made book. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, oh, this is what Todd Johnson was talking about. I've got my own story now, and I shouldn't just sew it together. I should actually pitch it to people and see if someone will publish it, because that is what I do. I get things published. So then I shopped it around places, and every place I had worked previously didn't know what to do with it. It's not that they didn't like it, they just weren't sure. Like Vertigo is like, well, you do this type of material, like this seems to be more for kids. I go, no, it's all ages, because everything I do, I enjoy it. Yeah. And I'm not a kid. And the same way I felt like, you don't have to be a little kid to like Archie Comics, because that was my first love. Dark Horse was going to publish it at first, and then I got a rejection letter from them. Like they thought about it and they weren't sure how to market it. And now they publish a reprints of it. But tiny publisher, Sirius Entertainment, they were publishing Cry for Dawn and Akiko by Mark Crilly. Rob Horan, the publisher of that company, I was at a convention, and I had, at my table, I had the comics that I'd worked on. I had some Xeroxes of work that I'd done or stuff that was coming out that I had working on, because I always like fans to see what was coming up. And then I had the Scary Godmother stuff just out there. It's like, hey, this is something I'm interested in doing. And Rob walked by the table and he said, introduced himself and said he was a fan of my work. I said, thanks. And he was like, what are you working on? What are you doing? And I told him I was working on some, like, probably Black Orchid or something like that. And then he said, what's that? And pointed to Scary Godmother. And I said, oh, this is a story, like my own thing. It's called The Scary Godmother. And he flips through it and he goes, who's publishing it? And I said, well, nobody right now. He goes, I'll publish it. And I went, what? And he goes, yeah, I don't, I've never published a painted book before, but he goes, my whole thing is vanity projects. I like to publish the stuff I like, and nothing is like the thing I did before. And I was like, well, I mean, I do have a couple of, I have it pitched out to some other people. He goes, well, if they don't pick it up, call me. And, I wasn't sure, like I'd never had anything self-published before. And I didn't know, it's like, how am I going to legally get involved with this? I want someone who knows the ropes to publish it. And he was always really, really good to me. He published 4 books and 11 comics. And by the time the first one was out, it got optioned by Mainframe Entertainment. And then I started making other ones, and we did a play here in Chicago of it. And then the play we adapted to become a TV show.
That blows my mind that people didn't know how to market it, how to publish it, because 1, release it in October. 2, like you ended up winning a bunch of Eisners for it.
Yeah.
That's kind of mind blowing.
I mean, I think comics was just starting to expand into other things, and it was an unusual looking thing, right? It didn't look like regular comics. It wasn't superheroes. It wasn't edgy Vertigo stuff. It wasn't fantasy. It
has a storybook feel too.
Yeah, a storybook feel to it. It was, real cartoony. I think now, I mean, there's so much being published everywhere and online and stuff. It wouldn't have been a problem now as far as finding people that were interested in it, or people would say like, oh, we'll take a chance on that. But back then, people were looking for a certain thing. Vertigo was known for certain types of stuff. To throw this thing out, I got a lot of blowback editorially for the Little on the Storybook, because and it was all valid. I don't think there's anything wrong with me mentioning it, but I know that Paul Levitz, just had some issues. He was like, well, we can't put a Vertigo label, it's a mature title label, on something that looks like it's for kids. And then I was like, well, can't we put, I don't think anyone who picks up this book is going to go pick up Why the Last Man, and their parents aren't going to do that either. They're not going to say, hey, this one looks like it's for an 8-year-old. I'm also going to give them The Invisibles. So we put for mature readers of all ages on it, because I said this book is for people who liked Sandman, who love Sandman, who probably are having kids now. Because throughout my career working on Sandman, and as I got away from, the time that I actually did it, there are fans who followed my work, but there are fans who still love Sandman. They get married, they have kids, they share their love of comics with their kid. Don't you jump up on that mantle. Oh, don't. He's hungry too. So, I wanted something that would introduce them to the world of Sandman without the intensity of Sandman. So then later they could read Sandman, and all the characters, it's like, and they didn't want us to mention Death's name. So we just called her the oldest sister.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want the word death in there. It's like, well, we can't put the word death in there for kids, because what is that going to mean? I was like, it's just a word at that point. And we don't talk about what she does, and we don't, you don't show her, going somewhere, but we do have Barnabas being afraid to talk to the older sister because he knows what it means. But I figured that's all subtext. I used to watch Bugs Bunny cartoons and not get the stuff that was for the adults that were watching it, the kind of double entendre jokes. So I figured I could work on 2 levels, no problem, right?
That is mind blowing to me because, like, as an '80s kid, I remember a Rambo cartoon, and that was for kids.
Yeah, shooting is different.
Scary Godmother has kind of become its own entity. Yeah, like I'm really interested in the stage play. Actually, like, how did you end up putting that together and coming up with a set?
Well, there was a small theater company here in Chicago that contacted me about adapting it, and then I, of course, adapted it with their director. We put on 26 performances here in Chicago. I have some of it online that I put on there, and also it was one of their, like, I did a link, like a private link to people who had supported my Kickstarter. Everybody could get, that. It was really fun. It was the only weekend I wasn't in town that they had a videographer come and video it. And the dude did not, like, all I wanted was the camera at the top of the theater to show the whole stage the whole time. This guy, like, he went down and he, like, would zoom in on people and he would miss jokes or bits of business that were important. So I watch it and it frustrates me, but I still love it. There were dance numbers in it, and the actors were amazing. And some fans, Mark and Andrea Davis, had gone to San Diego Comic-Con and won an award. Mark was dressed as Bugaboo and Andrea was dressed as Scary Godmother. And Mark made this Bugaboo costume, and they gave the Bugaboo costume to me so we could use it for the play. And they flew into Chicago to see it. I had people fly in from all around the country to see that play, which was pretty intense.
It's really
because
cool.
it was a small theater, and I would love to do that play again.
That was very cool. Would you say that Scary Godmother is the property that you've worked on that has meant the most to you?
Yes.
So
yes, it is.
I have a question about that. In 2008, you worked on a children's book called Magic Trixie, which I've never read, but it looks
You should read them. I illustrate them. There's 3 of them.
Yeah. It looks quite similar.
Well, I like a curly-haired girl. She was a character while I was working on the Death manga, Death at Death's Door. I kept thinking of this story about, like, a little witch girl and all her monster friends, and she wouldn't be good at magic, right? Magic is something you have to learn. Like, it's hard and you have to practice. Because anything that you want to do and do well, you have to practice. Some people are automatically talented and it comes to them, like, in a genius, freakish, savant way, right? But then other people, they like something and they're okay at it, but you have to keep practicing to get better, whether it's martial arts or baseball or cooking or whatever, it's like you hone your skills. So I figured magic would be the same way. And it would be nice to have a character that wasn't, super proficient at something. And then I could deal with a children's dynamic. And I wanted it to be a series where there's she would have adventures or just stuff that happens to her. So the first one is just called Magic Trixie. And then the second was called Magic Trixie Sleeps Over. And then the third one is called Magic Trixie and the Dragon. Oh, there's a cat hair. And I did, I still I have one more of those that I'd like to do. Which my problem is I don't have enough hours in the day to do all of the things that I want to do or the stories I have in my head. And I have to just sit down and choose one and start it and finish it and then move along to the next one.
Yeah.
But I'm always juggling a lot of stuff at the same time.
Yeah. Someone I spoke to recently says that about you, that your whole life is art. It's not just the comics. Like,
who did you talk to?
It was off the record, but it was Barbara Kiesel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I
said
like
everything you do is artistic.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been accused of being fancy all the time. And sometimes that I have to do everything perfectly. And I'm not perfect in any way, but I like things to look nice.
Everything okay? Oh, no worries. What happened?
Well, it's past the cat's dinner time, and Oberon went up on the buffet. I've got like a big glass skull that had rose petals in it from roses I have been given, so kind of like a homemade potpourri. And he just knocked it off the buffet and
Anything
started
break?
to eat potpourri. No, but all the contents went all over the place. Thankfully, it didn't break, and I'm glad. Like I was worried that it was. I have made some vases that look like birch trees, and one of them is on the table. And I thought it took me years to make that because I had made it and finished it, but then just recently got a chance to glaze it in a class that I had to sign up for just for glazing, and it took me 5 weeks to finish. Like glazing all the stuff, and if he broke that, I would have been livid.
See,
No,
this is why
just
Barbara says your whole life is art, because all of that stuff you just mentioned.
if I could, I mean, I am working towards getting a kiln because there's a lot of stuff I really enjoy doing pottery, and I would like to not have to go. I mean, I really love, in Chicago, we have a great place called the Lil Street Art Center, and it's very close to me. But if I need to use a kiln and glaze stuff, I have to sign up like for a class that costs $400 and some to do it. And I don't always have that money or that time to be able to do it. And you can't just build stuff, right? Like if you take a class there, you have to take what they offer. And I've taken a bunch of their beginner classes. Like I think that's how I got into it. I took a beginner class. I really liked it. So I took the same one because it was the only time slot I could do it in. And they only allow you to do that so many times before they're like, you got to move on to a different class. And I was like, but the other classes are not at the time I can go. I have other things at different times. This is really the only time I have available. And then like, well, we can't take you back in because we need this for other people. So I need my own kiln.
Understood. So I don't think I have a lot of questions left, but what can we look forward to for Scary Godmother moving forward?
Well, I'm working with Monster Forge Productions to try and get a TV show going.
Great.
Again. So I've revamped like not the origin, but I've updated a little bit of the origin and then set a series that would take place entirely on the Fright side, which is fun and has a lot more cool new things that would happen in it. Because I know it's been quite a long time since Scary Godmother was on television, but there's a whole generation of people who grew up watching it who are now old enough that I see them posting nostalgia posts on TikTok or at Halloween, or they're doing duets and cosplay, doing lines from it, and then someone else pops in and so it's like there's a Hannah and an Orson, or someone cosplay as Scary Godmother, and oh my gosh, that just makes my heart go crazy. So I want to make more, but I need someone to, I need a streaming service to come knocking, or more accurately, we have to get a pitch and go pitch it. So
the mainframe special, somebody uploaded them on YouTube, and then some of the comments are like, if you saw this as a kid, your childhood was epic. Yeah,
well, I mean, that's one of my favorite things at comic book shows. I mean, I also have other stories that I'm working on. Like right now I have another Scary Godmother story that I've been slowly drawing while I've been drawing other stuff. But the when I'm at a comic book show and you see, 23-year-olds or whatever walking by, and there's like a group of 5 of them, and some of them go to their friends, and their friends are like, what's wrong with you? And then another friend goes, they're like, it's my childhood. And they come running over, and half of them are like, I don't know what this is. So I have determined what happens is at that time is when you either were a Nickelodeon person, or you were a Cartoon Network person, or you were a Disney Channel person, or you were a Cartoon Network person. That's what you were watching as a kid growing up. It was like one channel type of deal. And that's what it is. Like, because they're like, didn't you see the show when you were a kid? And they're like, no, was it a show? And they're like, yes, it was a thing. And so I was like, what did you watch? And they'll start naming things, and it's like 4 Disney shows in a row. So it was like, these kids only watch Disney, and these people watch Cartoon Network, and that's why they know what Scary Godmother is. And I said, well, here's a perfect opportunity. You get to show your friend, and there's a book of stories you may have never seen before, because if you just saw the TV show, here's the compilation that has, like 500 pages worth of stories and art that you've never seen. And they're like, yay. And then the other person is like, well, I guess I'll get this, because if you say if it's cool. And I've also seen people review it for the first time because they might be living with someone, they like married somebody, or they're partnered up with their domestic partner, and Halloween will come around and they'll start Scary Godmothering stuff, and the people were like, I don't know what this is. So last Halloween there were a lot of reviews that were happening because people were, doing a video about how they introduced their significant other to this thing that meant a lot to them in their childhood, which also makes me feel like the Scary Godmother for real. It's like, I'm so happy that I bring them, spooky joy.
It's very cool. But what is Mick like as a collaborator?
Oh my gosh, he's fantastic. He's such a good writer. And he's, all wrestlers are so, first of all, huge. I was gonna say, if you haven't seen Peacemaker, you should watch Peacemaker. It's amazing. John Cena is incredible. But I find that most wrestlers who are really good at their job are great storytellers in general. They're super improv artists. They're great actors because they have to change on a dime. There's scripts that they've had to learn. There's also scripts or ways they thought something was going, and then 2 minutes before curtain, then they're told by whatever, it's like, oh, guess what? We're deciding to do this instead. Now you must do this thing. And a lot of them go on to act successfully in other mediums. But Mick is really great because, one, he completely trusted me in so much as he knew that I was really good at what I do. And so he didn't need to write a script like a comic book script. He wrote a story, and he trusts me to break it down into the format it needs to be. And because I enjoy doing that, and also reading a story, now you can hear my other cat meowing in the background. He's excited because he finished eating, and now he's very loud and chirpy. But anyway, so Mick would send me like handwritten stuff that he wrote out like while he was traveling on a legal paper in his handwriting, and then I would read the whole thing and I'd break it down. In fact, actually, that is something I can actually show right now. You said that you like things that are shown.
Oh, okay.
He just sent me this. Okay, so one year, his son, Mick Foley's son, Hugh, had written a story when he was a little kid. It's a crazy Christmas story. And so it's called Crazy Christmas. And Mick asked me to illustrate it because he was going to have it made as a book for his son. So it's really just the story that his son wrote. And then I went through, and it's exactly like all the stories a kid would write, that kind of weird stream of consciousness stuff. But it was him and his dad, how they saved Christmas from an evil fake Santa who had kidnapped the real Santa. And they had to go, and then his dad had to like power bomb the other guy. But they had no money, and the kid had, it's like, I've got money, Dad, don't worry, we can get to the North Pole. And it's got probably my favorite drawing of it was like of Santa's house that I did. It's like, I totally love it.
This is so cool.
Yeah. So, but that was written down because Mick had kind of just listened to Hugh tell the story and hand wrote it. But even when he would write other stuff for me, like Tales from Rascal Lane or Halloween Hijinks, it was just, stuff he had written on a legal pad. And then I would break it into into storybook format. I was like, well, how many pages do you want it to be? And then I would just edit. Did
evil Santa spell his name with an X instead of
No, he didn't. No, he was just the evil Santa, and he was referred to as that, or the fake Santa.
I understand you also design ring gear for people like Bryan Danielson.
Yes, I did. I have not done any of that recently. I really enjoyed doing that. I would like to do that more because it's super fun. But yeah, I still really need to wear that beautiful robe that cost so much money that he only wore for 18 seconds when Seamus kicked him and Russ. But it was really fun collaborating with him on stuff like that, because also he trusted, when he first contacted me about designing gear, he was still in NXT. And I mean, I had known him from Ring of Honor and stuff, but I asked him, how, like, what type of thing are you looking for? Are you trying to do American Dragon thing, or, are you going to keep your own name, or what's going on? And I, like, the very first gear I designed from him, I wanted to keep the dragon in there, but I started thinking about, and this is interesting because I don't know if anyone else has had this type of process when they're trying to think of ring gear. But I was thinking of Bryan as like just kind of this like really awesome American dude, like it's really classic. He's doing classic wrestling, and he's not the giant beefy dude that you're used to seeing, like the heavyweight style size guy, but he's just good looking and all American. Is like, what's a classic American thing that everyone, that America does better than anybody else? And all I could think of was a classic car. I was like, what's a cool classic car? It's like a Mustang, a 1966 Mustang is so cool. So I started basing his gear design off of a 1966 Mustang with like the dragon. Like, so I took that car and made it gear. So it was really simple with the one stripe, but it had little flames on it. And then I tried to do his name and logo in the font that was for the car. And then I made the dragon look like the little Mustang that was on the side of it. And then I just started, it was like, once we did that gear, he liked it. And we kept it because he wanted to keep the maroon and white theme of his colors. And then I just started to build on that with different things, like taking it to the next level each time. And if he had some request, so like when he had that robe, he wanted something that was going to go along with his character as his character started to become more, I don't know, like in my estimation, more Ric Flairish, more egotistical. And so I was like, are you looking for like full Ric Flair, or are you like Tully Blanchard to Ric Flair? And he was like, yeah, Tully Blanchard to Ric Flair. And I would have, if we had time in the storyline, I would have built him different robes and got him all the way up to like the super rhinestone studded. But that coat or that beautiful robe, because I became very good friends with the guys that built the gear, that they made it. So it's like I would give my designs to main event gear guys, and who are down in Alabama. And I've sewn things before, so I would try and make sure that everything I did was easy to sew, instead of, because I didn't know what they have, but now they have like silk screening stuff and all sorts of cool things that they can make gear, and they make some spectacular stuff. But they told me how long it took for them to put all of the like Swarovski crystals and rhinestones and flames and other stuff that was on there, how many hours it took. And they even made for me Scary Godmother pants and like a hoodie that has wings on it that I can just wear when it's cold in Chicago for Halloween. They're really good guys. So that was really fun. And I really like doing it.
I'm aware this might be sacrilege, speaking to a wrestling fan from Chicago, but I think Bryan Danielson is the best in the world.
I think he's the best in the world too. But
Okay.
if you ask me what the best match I've ever seen live was CM Punk versus Samoa Joe at Ring of Honor in like the freezing cold.
1, 2, or 3?
The last one. The third one, the hour-long match. I think, I'm trying to think, it may have been even at the, they all started blending together is what the event it was. There was an event where Ricky Steamboat was there, who was like my first like favorite wrestler. But it was in the field house that was down on Harlem Avenue, and it was February. And I know at that field house, they waited till people got there to turn the heat on in that place. So you got there, it was really cold. And the only thing that was putting heat in there was like wrestling fans' bodies. And we stood up and like watched this intense, like match with Punk and Joe. And it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And still, I've seen a lot of awesome matches since then. And obviously Punk's done incredible matches since then. But when you ask me, that one always comes back to me. It's like, what's the favorite match I've seen? Because it went on so long. I saw some crazy ECW shows at the Aragon. Like my ex and I happened to be up in like a opera style box in like the old theater that was there with like wrestler wives and junk like that. And there was a Sabu Sandman match that was happening down in the ring, and we're like looking down at it, and suddenly like as ECW does, everything went off into the crowd, and suddenly like Sabu was like, I couldn't see him anymore because he was underneath the box that we're in, and suddenly I'm looking over the side, and suddenly there's a tap on my shoulder, and it's Sabu, and he's like, "Excuse me, hon," and he just pushes me out of the way, and he jumps up on the thing and dives off the balcony onto
Sandman.
the floor, onto Sandman, and it was just like, what the hell, unless it was New Jack, I can't remember, because they were all there and all those dudes were beat to hell. It was the most 90s thing that I've ever been involved in my entire life. But
that is like, so awesome.
Second, he'd run from like the bottom of the thing up the stairs of the back of the place, come through there, and just like with like emotion, he's just like, "Excuse me, hon," just like up and over without thinking about it. It's like jumping off my roof. I could never do that.
Yeah. I always thought it was funny because I knew you were a big wrestling fan, and I was like, I feel like a lot of comics creators aren't. But when I found out that you also had a background in improv, I was like, oh, that completely makes sense.
Well, every wrestler I've ever met has either wanted to do comics or they like comics. And then instead of doing that, they became comics, Mm-hmm. It's like they became the thing instead of drew the thing or wrote the thing. And so it's like, I found there to be a lot of parallels between professional wrestling and comic creation. It's like there are two big companies. Everything else is indie and hustling. You often meet the people you admire sitting behind a 6-foot card table at a convention of some kind. You may or may not be working for an unscrupulous person that may or may not pay you, and you become famous by working at one company and you hit like the big time, but then you don't always necessarily stay in favor. It's a constant hustle, and there's also, we're all freelancers. Mm-hmm. It's like none of the wrestlers are under contract. Everybody there is a work for hire guy, and all comics people are work for hire. And you have to worry about selling your own merch and making sure you're your own promotion. as more or less. You have to do all your own, now do your social media and meet and greet with your fans, and it's very similar. You're telling a story.
My last question is, you worked recently with Leah Moore on the Morrison Hotel anthology.
Yes, I did.
You a big Doors fan?
Not so much.
Really? That's interesting.
I mean, I'm as big a Doors fan as you can be if you like music, but I'm not like crazy Doors fan. Yeah, I'm sorry, this might be a disappointing answer to this question. It's like, I like the Doors fine, but they they don't hit me on that emotional crying level like they hit so many other people. I probably have other bands for that, but it's not that I didn't like them. I like them very much, and but there are other bands that I probably would be more.
But what was it like working on Indian Summer? What was working with Leah like?
Oh, she's very excellent. That was more difficult, because one, I wanted to tell a story, but two, I wanted to make sure that I was drawing people accurately enough. Because you can find photo reference of them, but then to make them do things, you don't know if it's going to look like them. And thankfully mine was more just like a dreamy, trippy love sequence, where it was almost like a song set to music. Well, it was a song set to music now that I think about it. But it was Leah's interpretation of a song that set to music. And so sometimes my only regret was I did not have enough time to draw all of the human beings at that festival the way that it should have properly been illustrated. Because I was looking at music festivals of the day, and it's a Woodstock style thing where there should have been a George Perez background worth of people. And because of what I had to do and some physical issues with my arm, I could not get all of that done. But I really liked the beauty and the ethereal, dreamy quality of it. And it was and I was playing the music, the song over and over while I was working on it, so I could try and get into that headspace of it.
That's interesting, because I feel like if you play that song over and over again, you'll eventually fall asleep.
Well, he falls asleep in it, or at least in a drug-induced sleep. So then he has little experience there.
Thank you, Jill Thompson, for coming on the show.